Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today, we're doing a refresher. We're going to start with chapter 2 because Krishna starts speaking in chapter 2. We'll read a chapter, the entire chapter. One person will read the chapter out aloud. And then we will have comments from everybody of what they got from the chapter. Not too much discussion, but comments. So just listen to the chapter and then talk about what you get from it, what you learn from it. You can take up to 2 to 4 minutes to talk about it. And once everybody has had a chance to talk about it, we'll go to chapter 3. If you would like to volunteer to read, go ahead and type R. We're going to start with David. David, go ahead. Chapter 2, please.
Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, self-realization. These are the words that Sri Krishna spoke to the despairing Arjuna, whose eyes were burning with tears of pity and confusion. This despair and weakness in a time of crisis are mean and unworthy of you, Arjuna. How have you fallen into a state so far from the path to liberation? It does not become you to yield to this weakness. Arise with a brave heart and destroy the enemy. How can I ever bring myself to fight against...
David, let me interrupt you just for a second. Let me just speak a little bit about chapter 1. That was my mistake. So let me speak about the chapter 1 a little bit, and then we can continue. You can start right from the beginning of chapter 2. So in chapter 1, Sanjay describes what is happening on the battlefield. He describes the two armies facing one another. And Arjuna asked Krishna, who is his charioteer, to drive the chariot right in the middle of the two armies. There he stands, he looks across to the other side and sees his relatives and his teacher, especially Dronacharya and Bhishma. And he says, how am I going to fight them? How is it proper for me to do this? And he drops his arms. He's in complete chaos. He doesn't know what to do. All his ideas have failed him. His courage has failed him. And mostly he doesn't know what to do. So he turns to Krishna for help. So that is what happens in chapter 1, which sets up the chapter 2. Chapter 2 is where Krishna starts speaking to Arjuna. So with that, David, please go ahead.
Okay, let me just say a little bit. I think it helps with the a little part of the introduction from this. This is translation by Eknath Erzwaran. I think it may help people. So, as Arjuna's spiritual teacher, Sri Krishna's task now is to rouse Arjuna from his despair and set him on his way to self-realization. Arjuna is essentially a man of action, renowned for his bravery, nobility, and skill in the art of war, intelligent, but not given to reflection. Yet in his present crisis, he finds that the active life is not enough. He is forced to ask the perennial questions about life and death. Does he have a soul? Does it survive death? Is there a deeper reality than we perceive in the world around us? If so, is it possible to know it directly? And for Arjuna, is always practical, what effect does such knowing have on everyday life? In his answer, Krishna touches on almost all the main themes and concepts of the Gita. Chapter 2 is thus a kind of overview of the 16 chapters to come. Chapter 2, self-realization. Sanjaya. These are the words that Sri Krishna spoke to the despairing Arjuna, whose eyes were burning with tears of pity and confusion. Krishna. This despair and weakness in the time of crisis are mean and unworthy of you, Arjuna. How have you fallen into a state so far from the path to liberation? It does not become you to yield to this weakness. Arise with a brave heart and destroy the enemy. Arjuna says, how can I ever bring myself to fight against Bhishma and Drona, who are worthy of reverence? How can I, Krishna? Surely it would be better to spend my life begging than to kill these great and worthy souls. If I killed them, every pleasure I found would be tainted. I don't even know which would be better, for us to conquer them or for them to conquer us. The sons of Dhritarashtra have confronted us, but why would we care to live if we killed them? My will is paralyzed and I am utterly confused. Tell me which is the better path for me. Let me be your disciple. I have fallen at your feet. Give me instruction. What can overcome a sorrow that saps all my vitality? Even power over men and gods or the wealth of an empire seem empty. This is how Arjuna, the great warrior, spoke to Sri Krishna with the words, "O Krishna, I will not fight." He fell silent. As they stood between the two armies, Sri Krishna smiled and replied to Arjuna, who had sunk into despair. Krishna said, "You speak sincerely, but your sorrow has no cause. The wise grieve neither for the living nor for the dead. There has never been a time when you and I and the kings gathered here have not existed, nor will there be a time when we will cease to exist. As the same person inhabits the body through childhood, youth, and old age, so too at the time of death, he attains another body. The wise are not deluded by these changes. When the senses contact sense objects, a person experiences cold or heat, pleasure or pain. These experiences are fleeting. They come and go. Bear them patiently, Arjuna. Those who are unaffected by these changes, who are the same in pleasure and pain, are truly wise and fit for immortality. Assert your strength and realize this. The impermanent has no reality. Reality lies in the eternal. Those who have seen the boundaries between these two have attained the end of all knowledge. Realize that which pervades the universe and is indestructible, no power can affect this unchanging, imperishable reality. The body is mortal, but that which dwells in the body is immortal and immeasurable. Therefore, Arjuna, fight in this battle. One believes he is the slayer, another believes he is the slain. Both are ignorant. There is neither slayer nor slain. You were never born. You will never die. You have never changed. You can never change. Unborn, eternal, immutable, immemorial, you do not die when the body dies. Realizing that is indestructible, eternal, unborn, and unchanging, how can you slay or cause another to slay? As one abandons worn-out clothes and acquires new ones, so when the body is worn out, a new one is acquired by the self who lives within. The self cannot be pierced by weapons or burned by fire. Water cannot wet it, nor can the wind dry it. The self cannot be pierced or burned, made wet or dry. It is everlasting and infinite, standing on the motionless foundation of eternity. The self is unmanifested, beyond all thought, beyond all change. Knowing this, you should not grieve. O mighty Arjuna, even if you believe the self to be subject to birth and death, you should not grieve. Death is inevitable for the living. Birth is inevitable for the dead. Since these are unavoidable, you should not sorrow. Every creature is unmanifested at first, and then attains manifestation. When its end has come, it once again becomes unmanifested. What is there to lament in this? The glory of the self is beheld by a few, and a few describe it. A few listen, but many without understanding. The self of all beings living within the body is eternal and cannot be harmed. Therefore, do not grieve. Considering your dharma, you should not vacillate. For a warrior, nothing is higher than war against evil. The warrior confronted with such a war should be pleased. Arjuna, for it comes as an open gate to heaven. But if you do not participate in this battle against evil, you will incur sin, violating your dharma and your honor. The story of your dishonor will be repeated endlessly, and for a man of honor, dishonor is worse than death. These brave warriors will think you have withdrawn from battle out of fear, and those who formerly esteemed you will treat you with disrespect. Your enemies will ridicule your strength and say things that should not be said. What could be more painful than this? Death means the attainment of heaven. Victory means the enjoyment of earth. Therefore, rise up, Arjuna, resolve to fight. Having made yourself alike in pain and pleasure, profit and loss, victory and defeat. Engage in this great battle, and you will be freed from sin. You have heard the intellectual explanation of Sankhya, Arjuna. Now listen to the principles of yoga. By practicing these, you can break through the bonds of karma. On this path, effort never goes to waste, and there is no failure. Even a little effort towards spiritual awakeness will protect you from the greatest fear. Those who follow this path, resolving deep within themselves to seek me alone, attain singleness of purpose. For those who lack resolution, the decision of life are many-branched and endless. There are ignorant people who speak flowery words and take delight in the letter of the law, saying that this is nothing else. Their hearts are full of selfish desires, Arjuna. Their idea of heaven is their own enjoyment, and the aim of all their activities is pleasure and power. The fruit of their action is continued rebirth. Those whose minds are swept away by the pursuit of pleasure and power are incapable of following the supreme goal and will not attain samadhi. The scriptures describe the three gunas, but you should be free from the action of the gunas established in eternal truth, self-controlled, without any sense of duality or the desire to acquire and hoard. Just as a reservoir is of little use when the whole countryside is flooded, scriptures are of little use to the illumined man or woman who sees the Lord everywhere. You have the right to work, but never the fruit of work. You should never engage in the action for the sake of reward, nor should you long for inaction. Perform work in this world, Arjuna, as a man established within himself, without selfish attachments, and alike in success and defeat. For yoga is perfect evenness of mind. Seek refuge in the attitude of detachment, and you will amass the wealth of spiritual awareness. Those who are motivated only by desire for the fruits of action are miserable, for they are constantly anxious about the results of what they do. When consciousness is unified, however, all vain anxiety is left behind. There is no cause for worry, whether things go well or ill. Therefore, devote yourself to the disciplines of yoga, for yoga is skill in action. The wise unify their consciousness and abandon attachment to the fruits of action, which binds a person to continual rebirth. Thus they attain a state beyond all evil. When your mind has overcome the confusion of duality, you will attain the state of holy indifference to things you hear and things you have heard. When you are unmoved by the confusion of ideas and your mind is completely united in deep samadhi, you will attain the state of perfect yoga. Arjuna replies, tell me of those who live established in wisdom, ever aware of self, O Krishna. How do they talk? How do they sit? How do they move about? Krishna replied, they live in wisdom, who see themselves in all and all in them, who have renounced every selfish desire and sense craving tormenting the heart. Neither agitated by grief, nor hankering after pleasure, they live free from lust and fear and anger. Established in meditation, they are truly wise. Fettered no more by selfish attachments, they are neither elated by good fortunes nor depressed by bad. Such are the seers. Even as a tortoise draws in its limbs, the wise can draw in their senses at will. Aspirants abstain from sense pleasures, but they still crave for them. These cravings all disappear when they see the highest goal. Even of those who tread in the path, the stormy senses can sweep off the mind. They live in wisdom, who subdue their senses and keep their minds ever absorbed in me. When you keep thinking about sense objects, attachment comes. Attachment breeds desire, the lust of possession that burns to anger. Anger clouds the judgment. You can no longer learn from past mistakes. Lost is the power to choose between what is wise and what is unwise, and your life is utter waste. But when you move amidst the world of sense, free from attachment and aversion alike, there comes the peace in which all sorrows end, and you live in the wisdom of the self. The disunited mind is far from wise. How can it meditate? How can it be at peace? When you know no peace, how can you know joy? When you let your mind follow the call of the senses, they carry away your better judgment as storms drive a boat off its charted course on the sea. Use all your power to free the senses from attachment and aversion alike, and live in the full wisdom of the self. Such a sage awakes to light in the night of all creatures. That which the world calls day is night of ignorance to the wise. As rivers flow into the ocean but cannot make the vast ocean overflow, so flow the streams of the sense world into the sea of peace that is the sage. But this is not so with the desirer of desires. They are forever free who renounce all selfish desires and break away from the ego cage of I, me, and mind to be united with the Lord. This is the supreme state. Attain to this and pass from death to immortality.
Thank you, David. Folks who came in late, what we are doing today is we are reading, this is a refresher. We are reading Gita chapter by chapter. We've just finished reading chapter 2. Now I request everybody to comment on what they got from chapter 2. You can speak for between 2 to 4 minutes. Go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom to speak about what you got from this chapter 2. We'll start with Madhav. Madhav, go ahead.
What I got from this chapter is that chapter 2 basically summarizes all of Gita in a way. It starts with it's kind of startling how pointed it is. It says, you're not the body, you're not the mind, and lays everything out. And all the preceding chapters are almost a small context to those statements that were said in chapter 2. And it's kind of beautiful how it just starts with the most impactful statements, and then it sort of explains it. That's what I got.
Wonderful, beautifully put. Thank you, Madhav. Folks, please go ahead and share what you got from this chapter. Next up is going to be Joe.
Okay, so I remember this chapter most notably because it really kind of, I remember us going through it and I was thinking about the dichotomy of control during a large part of this chapter, not being attached to outcomes in particular. So that was, I think, I forget what verse I highlighted it, but I think it was, I don't know, 16 or 17 along those lines. But that's neither here nor there. What you're starting to see here is also the importance of the center and periphery that I now, as I know it, the idea of the self and the external world. And so that this is where it's starting to introduce you to things as well as karma yoga and to some degree jnana yoga as well. So I really think it does kind of starts to set the stage for the idea of not necessarily being attached to the ego and how to essentially come back to the center. You start to see that. And I'm looking for specific passages that I can actually point to where, I mean, I don't know the version actually. What version did David read?
Eknath.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I have one who abandoned on 71 in the Sri Aurobindo version, who abandons all desires and lives and acts free from longing, who has no I or mine, who has extinguished his individual ego in the one and lives in that unity. He attains a great peace, and that's verse 71. And again, it's the thing that this kind of has set up for me, this particular chapter, is the idea of the ego and then kind of being separated from it, and essentially it's letting go through knowledge. I mean, that's essentially what he's saying, essentially through knowing and having an understanding of the world and being able to let go of attachments and not having fear of that. And then also this idea of investigating, like kind of looking at oneself in relationship to the whole universe as well. When we're talking, David's version actually captured this pretty well when he talked about death. So this is you're not just seeing yourself in relation to what you're doing, you're seeing yourself in relation to the whole. I mean, those are some initial comments. I mean, this is really perhaps, I think, the most one of the most important chapters, because it kind of really brought us in touch with, like, not only the yogas, but also the understanding of the self and the center and the periphery. You can kind of see where this sets up, even though we really didn't get to that till a little bit later in later chapters. But you can kind of see it looking back.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Joe. I think this is where the center and periphery is kind of set up, in the most brilliant way in the concept of Sthita Prajna. So that's just fantastic. Thank you. Next up is going to be Allison, followed by Jyoti. Allison.
All right, this is gonna sound really weird, but so I was just sitting here eating a bowl of cereal, and Evanika and I were chatting about cereal and what our favorite cereals are. And as David was reading, I sat there thinking that eating a bowl of cereal for dinner is like the center and the periphery. That you can sit there and always reach for these things that are out there, out far away, like a fancy dinner, a fancy this, fancy that. And sometimes there's no greater joy than a simple bowl of cereal for dinner. And that it really is like symbolic. It's like that book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, that it's really sort of symbolic that instead of always reaching for things that are far away and whatever, like just focus on what is actually going on right in that moment and enjoying that moment fully. And I feel like that's kind of what this book is about in a sense, it's just like you can't control everything that's going on all around you, but you can really enjoy what's right smack in front of you and focus it and notice it and pay attention to it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Next up is going to be Jyoti. And folks, go ahead and type ! if you would like to share your thoughts on chapter 2. Jyoti.
Yeah, I also like this chapter because it parallels with our daily transactions in life. Arjuna is very ignorant about what is going on, what his point of view is and what Krishna is trying to explain to him. So he is all emotional. He looks at as this is an evil act that he is asking me to do. He wants me to kill the people that I revere and who are related to me. And how can he ask me to do this? So Krishna is trying to bring him on track by explaining to him, you are not killing them. They are not going to be killed because there is no birth and there is no death. They are here, and we have to logically work on taking care of the right, what is right here, not what is wrong. And you cannot get led emotionally, make reasons emotionally. So he's explaining to him very nicely the concept of birth and death. And he's saying, you should not grieve. You should not feel sorrow. Nobody's dying here. The soul never dies. They will all be here. They are eternal. Everybody's eternal. So I think Krishna is still not believing it. He's having panic attacks. He's thinking, why Krishna would, who is his friend, would lead him astray like this. So eventually, Krishna is beginning to understand that what Krishna is trying to lead me into is thinking clearly, separate my thinking from fog that I am in. And he starts understanding. So this is what happens in our transactions in daily life too. We look at a situation from our point of view, and we are so very sure that what we are thinking is so correct because we are only thinking one-sided until somebody in our life gives us the knowledge, and then we compare it, because what we have inside us by now is a belief system which we have formed erroneously based on our perceptions, which may not be right, based on our own judgments about people. But we are not taking into consideration what is actually happening, what this is all about. It's only one-sided. So I really like this chapter. And also, like what Srikanth said, this is the beginning of the setting of the center and periphery. And this is how it starts. What should be in your center and what should you dispel to the periphery so that you can then be a whole person. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. I am actually stunned by kind of looking back, because we've been focusing on chapter 10 and chapter 11, where Krishna starts to disclose who he is. And by the time he got there, he has communicated so much to Arjuna. So it is very interesting to kind of come back and look at Arjuna in this state and start over looking at it. So thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. And you're absolutely right. Center and periphery, that Sthita Prajna concept is right here. I think it's best, it's like I was so stunned when I read it here. So just that concept for me is the heart of this. Next up is going to be Rupali. Rupali, go ahead.
Hi, Shrikant. I really like this moment of pause in the study of Bhagavad Gita, because we are halfway through the Gita, and it's good to reflect back on what we've learned so far, or what we've discovered so far. There are three things that come to mind in chapter 2. One is be stable and balanced. The second is the idea of Sthita Prajna, which is the core idea of know where you stand. Here I am. This is my place. And the third part is taking an aim and resolving to achieve that aim. So this chapter, in that sense, is very profound, because it says, in your daily life, these are the things to do, right? You take aim, you decide what you want to do, you go at it with focus and with stability, with a stable mind, and with a resolve. So I think this chapter was very helpful for me to kind of just be able to say, focus on what is the center, what is the periphery, where am I? I also like the part where it was very surprising to me when I read this chapter that Krishna is almost like scolding Arjuna to, come on, don't lose hope. What are you doing over there? And it's like a mother, coaxing a child to get whatever they need to do, and encouraging, reminding the child that you are good, you can do this, don't give up. So I felt that kind of a relationship between Arjuna and Krishna. And as a teacher, I also feel that, even teachers do this. They see their students struggling, but they don't want the students to struggle. They know that the child has to do the work themselves to get through the situation. So I see the mother-child, the teacher and student kind of relationship in here. And Arjuna is in the phase where he is lamenting and he is in grief, looking at all his kin around him and knowing that this is a very tragic situation. So here is when Krishna also reminds him that time is cyclical. And so the idea of cycles that we see later in Gita is kind of, the scene is now being set in this chapter. I feel that all the things that Krishna is going to talk about are pointed out in this chapter. So the idea of I, like I'm the center, I exist, is here. Then there is the periphery. The idea that the I, your soul, is everlasting. It is in every creation, in every human being. Through various examples, he mentions it to Arjuna. And he's saying that, don't let this material world, don't let the sensory world that you're seeing right now, don't let that affect you. Don't let it give you the fake feeling of achievement, because your true achievement is in the achievement of the knowledge of yourself. And so Krishna is going to lead everyone who's reading Gita in that discovery of the self. And he reminds Arjuna that, don't worry about the fruits. Don't worry about what's going to happen. Do your duty. Do your job. Don't even think about yourself as causing the results. So by not abandoning your duty, you're actually going to do well. So that's what he is telling Arjuna. So the whole idea of work, the whole idea of duty, the whole idea of karma is here. Now, this reminds me, in Jainism, there is the idea of a Jain ascetic who, is focused on the self. So the image, the idol that we had in our at home was a brass plate with a cutout of a human. So you see the negative space of the human, and it's just a cutout. And I would always ask my uncle, what is this? Like, it doesn't look like God at all. And he would say, that's you. That's a mirror. That's everything that's possible in you. And it's up to you to aspire to become those things. And really, it is yourself. So I think in this chapter, Krishna is saying, okay, who are you? What is yourself? Don't be attached to this material world. Don't let the emotions or senses affect you. And by negating, by removing, so in that statue, that's like a negative image where you're removing the unwanted things, you can then firmly focus your attention on consciousness, of your own consciousness of yourself. By regulating your senses, you can develop that steady habit, the sthita prajna, that is talked over here. So those are my thoughts about this chapter.
Wonderful, Rupali. Thank you. Thank you for, just going through all the key points. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Next up is going to be Evanik. We'll have first anybody who has not spoken, please go ahead and speak. Even if it is briefly, it's all right. But I want to hear from everybody. Evanik, you're next.
Yeah, so one of the things when David was reading his version, in the part where it says anger clouds the judgment, and I was just thinking how true that is. And then, I think it's, about the practice of temperance and not letting your feelings control, what you do or your actions. And I was thinking of the diagram and the part of the triangle that is about discipline. I know we went through different words about it, and I think discipline, especially in this instance, is a good word because that's what you have to do. in order to get where you want to be. And like Rupali said, to remove the unwanted things, you have to have the discipline to not act out your feelings. And and act out in the periphery, which is actually a part of the diagram too. The feelings going into devotion if you go from the outside in. So it's just when Rupali was talking, those points just came up for me, and it made the diagram make more sense than it already did. But really, if you're practicing going into the center, and Rupali said it so eloquently when she was talking about, uh, oh my gosh, Arjuna really discovering who he is. He's beginning to go towards the self or towards the center of who he is. And we're just seeing this in the beginning of the journey. And like Joe brought up, you're gonna see, it's setting the stage for the for the yokes, for the different yokes. So I think chapter 2, what I didn't get the first time, but what I got the second time is that you are like, really, Krishna is setting the stage for the journey that Arjuna is about to go on. And so that reading chapter 2 again and listening to people's comments is really bringing that home for me, whereas it wasn't as clear the first time that we did it. So I think this is a great exercise.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Elena. Elena, go ahead. Elena, you need to.
I'm here. I'm here. Yes, just unmuting myself.
Sure.
And good evening, everyone. My question and my say reflection on Gita. That's my just what came to me is. Let me just open it. Okay, so it's about Dharma. So what's happening here? Arjuna requests Krishna for guidance. And he says that my mind is confused about duty, dharma. Please tell me what's better for me. I'm your disciple. So he gives up, not really gives up, but he says like, yes, I'm your disciple. There is no questions. So you tell me what it is. You tell me who I am. You tell me what to do. And dharma here is the internal law governing creation, governing the existence, governing the universe. So how does Krishna explain what dharma is to Arjuna? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena. Folks, what we're doing is that right now we're just going through the observations everybody has on chapter 2, and we will go ahead and address all of this. Okay. Elena, I'll address your question after everybody is done speaking. Ashwin, you mentioned that you have you're familiar with the Gita. Could you talk about your impressions, what you get from chapter 2?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking as a whole. I think basically what I've actually seen a version of this also on a TV show as well, where each day represents a chapter, and I think it really basically what I'm seeing is that Arjuna is and I think other people touch on it. It really is trying. This is really the perfect time when Arjuna needs to isn't at that mode of conflict and sort of needs that inner voice inside him that is he's trying to. It's basically a battle with himself. It's sort of symbolic. So it's like Krishna's voice of telling him to, encouraging him to do the right thing. In this case, is basically his own inner intuition that's fighting the battle with his own mind and his own insecurities and his own fears of and his own attachments to what he thinks what his mind thinks is supposed to do, but based on his attachments to his family. But really, when Krishna talks to him, that's him coming to his own senses. I think that's really I think that sort of tough love is really necessary in cases where you want to succumb to your own insecurities. So I think that's kind of what I got out of it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ashwin. Appreciate that very much. Next up is going to be Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually something that had just come to me, that while everybody was offering some of their comments, and I really appreciated a lot of them, is this, and I alluded to it a little bit, is this idea of not being attached to externals and the understanding of oneself, and don't let the world, the sensory world, dictate who you are, and the importance of that, because that's where I remember reading about transcendentalism, essentially, that this chapter in particular was actually mentioned, is the idea of the self and the Atman, as a way of kind of not letting the world dictate who you are, and to understand yourself and your role in the world. And it basically kind of, again, it gets back to the center and the periphery, but I just, the idea of not allowing the world to dictate your actions and to do your duty as well. There's a sense of duty that's also introduced into this particular chapter. I thought, I failed to mention that, and that was one of the major connections when I was reading about transcendentalism, that actually, that this chapter in particular was actually referenced when I was going over that past meetup. So
thank you, Joe. Does anybody else have anything to say? I have a few comments, and then we'll go to chapter 3. So firstly, I want to highlight observations of Nilesh Marik. When he was talking about Bhagavad Gita, he said 4 things. He says, if you want to understand the context of Bhagavad Gita, there are 4 things. One, he says, is that to realize that this is a very bad context. This is the middle of a war, the largest war that time has ever seen. Arjuna is right there in the middle. He's completely broken down. All his knowledge, all his values, all his thoughts has failed him. So he's at a low point. So that's first, low point in a very bad context. Secondly, Gita is a dialogue which is delivered to an individual person. Krishna is talking to Arjuna, and Arjuna is a deserving person. He's a great man, Arjuna. Though he is currently in this state, he's a great man. And Arjuna and Krishna is his friend, and he's talking to him as a friend. So the third point is that it's not a static scripture. It is not like this thing that is being delivered to 1 million people. This is being tailored to Arjuna. It is being responsive to Arjuna. It's a conversation. It is not one way. You will notice Arjuna is asking all kinds of questions. Arjuna is challenging Krishna. He says, you told me this, but now you're telling me this. What is right? You told me how great Jnana is, and now you're asking me to do my karma? Why is that? And he does that again and again and again. And Krishna's reaction is that he's delighted by it, that Arjuna is actually trying to understand what is being said. And the last point is that it is pointing to the ultimate possible. And you see the beginnings of it in this chapter, the idea of Sthita Prajna. Idea of Sthita Prajna is you standing in the center. You know, many of us talked about center and periphery here. I think that is the core idea. Not center versus periphery, but you standing in the center and interacting with periphery while standing at the center. Of not blocking things off, but letting them, but by being focused on center so much, in the light of the center so much that all darkness kind of becomes irrelevant. As Nanishwar puts it, it's like a sun in the core of your being. You don't notice darkness in that sense. So it's a combination of bliss, this intense consciousness, intense awareness at the center of your being. Sthita, stha is a very, very beautiful root in Sanskrit. You know, it is about stay, it is about steady, it is about standing at the core of your being. So you're like at the center of gravity of everything. And the last point I wanted to make is just the beauty of the interaction between Krishna and Arjuna. You know, with just, and Nanishwar in his commentary does such a beautiful job, because he fills in the gaps of this. This is a dialogue between friends who value each other greatly. And that is the core. That is the substrate through which this is presented. All right, so let's go to chapter 3. I think the translation that David is using is very good. David, would you mind continuing? Thank you, David.
Chapter 3. Arjuna says, "O Krishna, you have said that knowledge is greater than action. Why then do you ask me to wage this terrible war? Your advice seems inconsistent. Give me one path to follow to the supreme good." Krishna replies, "At the beginning of time, I declared 2 paths for the pure heart. Jnana Yoga, the contemplative path of spiritual wisdom, and Karma Yoga, the active path of selfless service. One who shirks action does not attain freedom. No one can gain perfection by abstaining from work. Indeed, there is no one who rests for even an instant. All creatures are driven to action by their own nature. Those who abstain from action while allowing the mind to dwell on sensual pleasure cannot be called sincere spiritual aspirants, but they excel who control their senses through the mind, using them for selfless service. Fulfill all your duties. Action is better than inaction. Even to maintain your body, Arjuna, you are obliged to act. Selfless action imprisons the world. Act selflessly without any thought of personal profit. At the beginning, mankind and the obligation of selfless service were created together. Through selfless service, you will always be fruitful and find the fulfillment of your desires. This is the promise of the Creator. Honor and cherish the devas as they honor and cherish you. Through this honor, you will attain the supreme good. All human desires are fulfilled by the devas, who are pleased by selfless service. But anyone who enjoys the things given by the devas without offering selfless acts in return is a thief. The spiritually minded who eat in the spirit of service are freed from all their sins. But the selfish who prepare food for their own satisfaction eat sin. Living creatures are nourished by food, and food is nourished by rain. Rain itself is the water of life, which comes from selfless worship and service. Every selfless act, Arjuna, is born from Brahman, the eternal, infinite Godhead. Brahman is present in every act of service. All life turns on this law, O Arjuna. Those who violate it, indulging the senses for their own pleasure and ignoring the needs of others, have wasted their life. but those who realize the self are always satisfied. Having found the source of joy and fulfillment, they no longer seek happiness from the eternal world. They have nothing to gain or lose by any action. Neither people nor things can affect their security. Strive constantly to serve the welfare of the world by devotion to selfless work one attains the supreme goal of life. Do your work with the welfare of others always in mind. It was by such work that Janaka attained perfection. Others too have followed this path. What the outstanding person does, others will try to do. The standards such people create will be followed by the whole world. There is nothing in the three worlds for me to gain, Arjuna, nor is there anything I do not have. I continue to act, but I am not driven by any need of my own. If I ever refrain from continuous work, everyone would immediately follow my example. If I stopped working, I would be the cause of cosmic chaos, and finally of the destruction of the world and these people. The ignorant work for their own profit, Arjuna. The wise work for the welfare of the world, without thought for themselves. By abstaining from work, you will confront the ignorant who are engrossed in their action. Perform all work carefully, guided by compassion. All actions are performed by the Gunas of Prakriti. Deluded by identification with the ego, a person thinks, I am the doer. But the illumined man or woman understands the domain of the Gunas and is not attached. Such people know that the Gunas interact with each other. They do not claim to be the doer. Those who are deluded by the operation of the Gunas become attached to the results of their actions. Those who understand these truths should not unsettle the ignorant. Performing all actions for my sake, completely absorbed in the self and without expectation, fight, but stay free from the fever of the ego. Those who live in accordance with these divine laws without complaining, firmly established in faith, are released from karma. Those who violate these laws, criticizing and complaining, are utterly deluded and are the cause of their own suffering. Even the wise act within the limitations of their own nature. Every creature is subject to Prakriti. What is the use of repression? The senses have been conditioned by attraction to the pleasant and the aversion to the unpleasant. Do not be ruled by them. They are obstacles in your path. It is better to strive in one's own dharma than to succeed in the dharma of another. Nothing is ever lost in following one's own dharma. The competition in another's dharma breeds fear and insecurity. What is the force that binds us to selfish deeds, O Krishna? What power moves us, even against our will, as if forcing us? It is selfish desire and anger arising from the gunas of rajas. These are the appetites and evils which threaten a person in this life. Just as a fire is covered by smoke and a mirror is obscured by dust, just as the embryo rests deep within the womb, knowledge is hidden by selfish desire. Hidden, Arjuna, by this unquenchable fire for self-satisfaction, the inveterate enemy of the wise. Selfish desire is found in the senses, mind, and intellect, misleading them and burying the understanding in delusion. Fight with all your strength, Arjuna, controlling your senses, conquer your enemy, the destroyer of knowledge and realization. The senses are higher than the body. The mind is higher than the senses. Above the mind is the intellect, and above the intellect is the Atman. Thus, knowing that which is supreme, let the Atman rule the ego. Use your mighty arms to slay the fierce enemy that is selfish desire.
Thank you, David. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark to comment on chapter 3. What do you get from chapter 3? I'm going to start with Evanik.
Yeah, I remember this chapter really well because I think it focused, and I think this one was most helpful to me on a personal level because it helped me focus on my path and, what was driving my actions and, why in some cases you're so afraid to act. And it's because you're looking at the periphery, you're looking at how people are going to see you. You want approval from outside instead of like being driven by your own center, which would, in a sense, make you want to do things for the compassion of other people, like it talks about in the chapter. In the beginning, Arjuna talks about, show me the path, show me the way, right? And I think we all kind of look for that. And it's not just, and Krishna responds like there's not just one way. And I thought that was very poignant, because when you look at it, it's easy. The one path is easy. Just tell me what to do. I do it. It's fine. But that's not the way life works. What may work for one person because they're on one path is not going to work for another. And Krishna, being God, he can see that. So I thought that was poignant. The point where it says nothing to lose by any action when focusing on your spiritual path. So I think when I think of that, I think of like when you take the action, you're either going to get to your goal or you're going to learn from it and grow from it. But your focus should be on your goal or the center or the spiritual self, right? So no matter what action you're going to take, you're going to learn from it. And if that's where you're acting from. Now, if you're acting from your desires that are from the periphery, like more money, more things to impress others, then you're never going to be satisfied with any action. And I think the last part about knowledge being hidden by selfish desire, if you're just looking for knowledge just to gain for yourself, then yeah, it's hidden by your selfish desire. So this chapter really, I remember this so well because it was just like one of the more impactful ones for me.
Wow. Wonderful. I mean, it's amazing how much Gita is doing for everybody. So thank you very much. Thank you, Avanika, for sharing. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I actually really like this review. It's really giving, it really is showing how much we're getting from it. And we can do this a lot. The first one is the importance of the acting of selflessness, the selfless action in order to, to act for others. So that you're not necessarily just managing yourself to your desires, but you're seeing yourself as part of the greater whole. That's the first thing that is. The second part is that how this actually serves as an example for others. By acting selfless in the world, you're actually setting the standard for others. So being an example is another part of this that I found to be very important. The second part is about the idea of the gunas and how that can lead to selfish deeds. And to right action or wrong action within that framework. So that it's basically the quality of attention that you act with that actually matters, the quality by which you perform your duties. So, and that there needs to be a balance between the gunas as well. But those are, maybe I'm trying to think of a really good example on how that could actually have impacted me. But give me a minute to think about that a little bit more. But
sure. Anybody else wants to comment on what they got from chapter 3? Please go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. Jyoti.
I think actually I agree with Avanik and Joe. They got a good extract from chapter 3. The whole idea is that in life you have to be very considerate. You have to think about others before you fulfill your own desires, selfless, and detached. You cannot be very interested in acquiring material things and also do good for others, because they just are the opposites. They don't serve you well. So I think, and also the ego, that you have to let go of your persona that you want to hide under. And you have to just be forthright, upright, rather than I'm not I am what you want me to look at, how you want to look at me. No, be yourself. And that's what I like about this chapter. It's very clear, and it's very, it's not subtle, it's right there. And you can grab it for your everyday functions, and it was very satisfying. It's very satisfying. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. Does anybody else want to comment on chapter 3? Go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. All right, let's go to chapter 4. David, would you continue reading?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you.
Chapter 4, Wisdom in Action. Krishna states, I told this eternal secret to Vivasvat. Vivasvat taught Manu, and Manu taught Ikshvaku. Thus, Arjuna, eminent sages received knowledge of yoga in a continuous tradition. But through time, the practice of yoga was lost in the world. The secret of these teachings is profound. I've explained them to you today because you were my friend and devotee. Arjuna asks, you were born much after Vivasvat. You lived very long ago. Why do you say that you taught this yoga in the beginning? Krishna replies, you and I have passed through many births, Arjuna. You have forgotten, but I remember them all. My true being is unborn and changeless. I'm the Lord who dwells in every creature. Through the power of my own Maya, I manifest myself in a finite form. Whenever Dharma declines and the purpose of life is forgotten, I manifest myself on earth. I am born in every age to protect the good, to destroy the evil, and to reestablish Dharma. Those who know me as their own divine self break through the belief that they are the body and are not reborn as separate creatures. Such a one, Arjuna, is united with me. Delivered from selfish attachment, fear, and anger, filled with me, surrendering themselves to me, purified in the fire of my being, many have reached the state of unity in me. As they approach me, so I receive them. All paths, Arjuna, lead to me. Those desiring success in their actions worship the gods. Those actions in the world of mortals, their desires are quickly fulfilled. The distinctions of castle, guna, and karma have come from me. I am their cause, but I myself am changeless and beyond all action. Actions do not cling to me because I am not attached to their results. Those who understand this and practice it live in freedom. Knowing this, truth, aspirants desiring liberation in ancient times engaged in action. You too can do the same, pursuing an active life in the manner of those ancient sages. What is the action and what is inaction? This question has confused the greatest sages. I will give you the secret of action with which you can free yourself from bondage. The true nature of action is difficult to grasp. You must understand what is action and what is inaction, and what kind of action should be avoided. The wise see that there is action in the midst of inaction and inaction in the midst of action. Their consciousness is united and every act is done with complete awareness. The awakened sages call a person wise when all his understandings are free from anxiety about results. All his selfish desires have been consumed in the fire of knowledge. The wise, ever satisfied, have abandoned all external supports. Their security is unaffected by the results of their actions. Even while acting, they really do nothing at all. Free from expectations and from all sense of possession, with mind and body firmly controlled by the self, they do not incur sin by the performance of physical action. They live in freedom who have gone beyond the dualities of life. Competing with no one, they are alike in success and failure and content with whatever comes to them. They are free without selfish attachments. Their minds are fixed in knowledge. They perform all work in the spirit of service, and their karma is dissolved. The process of offering is Brahman. That which is offered is Brahman. Brahman offers the sacrifice in the fire of Brahman. Brahman is attained by those who see Brahman in every action. Some aspirants offer material sacrifices to the world. Others offer selfless service in the fire of Brahman. Some renounce all enjoyment of the senses, sacrificing them in the fire of sense restraint. Others partake of the sense, but offer them in service through the fire of senses. Some offer the workings of the senses and the vital forces through the fire of self-control, kindled in the path of knowledge. Some offer wealth, others offer sense restraint and suffering. Some take vows and offer knowledge and study of the scriptures, and some make the offering of meditation. Some offer the forces of vitality, regulating their inhalation and exhalation, and thus gain control over these forces. Others offer the forces of vitality through restraint of their senses. All these understand the meaning of service and will be cleaned of their impurities. True sustenance is in service, and through it a man or woman reaches the eternal Brahman. But those who did not seek to serve are without a home in the world. Arjuna, how can they be at home in any world to come? These offerings are born of work, and each guides mankind along a path to Brahman. Understanding this, you will attain liberation. The offering of wisdom is better than any material offering, Arjuna, for the goal of our work is spiritual wisdom. Approach those who have realized the purpose of life and question them with reverence and devotion. They will instruct you in this wisdom. Once you attain it, you will never again be deluded. You will see all creatures in the self and all in me. Even if you were the most sinful of sinners, Arjuna, you could cross beyond all sin by the raft of spiritual wisdom. As the heat of fire reduces wood to ashes, the fire of knowledge burns to ashes all karma. Nothing in this world purifies like spiritual wisdom. It is the perfection achieved in time through the path of yoga, the path which leads to the self within. Those who take wisdom as their highest goal, whose faith is deep and whose senses are trained, attain wisdom quickly and enter into perfect peace. But the ignorant, indecisive and lacking in faith, waste their lives. They can never be happy in this world or any other. Those established in the self have renounced selfish attachments to their actions and cut through the doubts with spiritual wisdom. They act in freedom. Arjuna, cut through this doubt in your own heart with the sword of spiritual wisdom. Arise, take up the path of yoga.
Thank you, David. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark to comment on chapter 4. I encourage everybody to share what they got from the chapter. We'll start with Joe, followed by Jyoti. Joe.
Yes, I very much liked this chapter as well. I think that it really explains wisdom, I think, better than anything I've read, to be quite honest, or I've come across, and the difference between right action and inaction. The idea that what is worth pursuing or not worth pursuing, and what type of knowledge is actually beneficial to you versus the type of knowledge that is actually not going to benefit you. That's not towards the material world. That's not towards, it's the idea of understanding the self. And that's what is really, and how the self fits in into nature and the world. So the other thing that I very much liked about this particular chapter, and that was really highlighted in many of the graphics that we covered over the time, is the number of ways we can get to the center. That I thought was one of the most powerful points that we shown and you kind of related this too with the Gospel of John, is that from emanating out, just the whether it's through self-study, through some people do it through, which I was surprised at David's version. I never heard a version say wealth yet, but that's one way. There's many ways to the center, and wealth, I don't know how wealth is defined there. So the number of different ways, the 16 different ways that we were talking about, that, how to get to your center, that was extremely powerful to me. And it's a distinguishing characteristic of the yoga, of the Gita, compared to some of the other works that we've studied. And it's a very important one too, because everybody has their own path with karma yoga and this idea of getting knowledge. And that's very powerful, because then you stop judging what everybody else is doing in that process, and you realize that they're on their own path. At least you hope so. It also speaks, it kind of builds off of the previous chapter too, about this idea of selflessness was established in the previous chapter, but this really speaks more to the idea of sacrifice within this, because this is your path to get to the center. Is like you're going to find you have to get on the path of knowledge, karma yoga, but there's sacrifice that's involved in that. So I think that there's also, I liked how it's related to the selfless action as well. But by far, I think the most important part is the distinction between the wisdoms, or how it really clearly articulates what wisdom is, because so many people sometimes don't think people will say, oh, it's applied knowledge. Well, what does that mean? And then that's what this really kind of is talking about, the importance of wise action. And in a way, you can even bring this back to, this is what's one of the relationships it has with the Tao Te Ching, wise action versus inaction, and how that can be wise action as well. And it kind of, you can combine those two. This is a good chapter.
Wonderful.
I mean, they're all good. I don't want.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. This is great. Next up is going to be Jyoti, followed by Evanik. Jyoti. Let me make sure. Give me just a second. Sorry, my mistake, Jyoti. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I was doing something wrong here.
No, it was
Now
me.
this speaks very directly to me about your diagram, Shrikant. That's where all the yogas are coming into being. And he's talking about bhakti yoga, devotion. He's talking about karma yoga, doing the right action without expecting a fruit. Jnana yoga, the knowledge. And it's putting all these three yogas succinctly in some form here. And he's explaining to us that this is how the life should be. You should not be very again, like selfishness in the second chapter. He brings it again in the third chapter. Don't be selfish. Make the offerings in any form. Some people make in the form of wealth. Some people make it in the form of wisdom. Some people do it in a different form. So this is only going to help you to form your whole self. And so when I think about this, then I think about your diagram, that how you have, put them all on all sides, the triangles at the outside and center and then periphery. Because what is going to happen is all the negativity is going into the peripheries. That's darkness. Light is inside in the core. So that's all I can think of. And I think this is also a very meaningful chapter. All the chapters are very meaningful. There was, and also, yes, I also, here is the beginning of the ultimate. You know, the Yogeshwar was talking about Brahma, ultimate. This is the, he's talking about the concept of ultimate. There's Brahma everywhere around us, and we have to reach it. So this is what I got from it. I'm just listening to David, and from there I'm trying to pull out some material. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. Next up is Evanik.
Yeah, I co-sign on what Jyoti said. I love hearing David's reading of this. I like it. So one thing about chapter 4 is I see Krishna showing who he is in the beginning of the chapter. You know, and then he talks about the action and I get the sense of being aware of your action, like not just acting, you know, without thinking. I mean, there's certain automatic actions, right, that we do, but I think it's being present to the moment and thinking about your action before you do it, whenever you can. So I like that. I think seeing Brahma in every action, I thought that was like significant because I think if you see it's like seeing the namaste, seeing the God in you, the God in me, seeing the God in you, and then also in every action, if you think about every action, trying to see the Brahma in it, it makes you think about it for a minute. Like, how am I going to act in this situation? Am I going to act from my feelings, or am I going to act from my center and from my core? And also thinking, is this action going to bring me closer to the center, or is it pulling me away from the periphery, like the diagram where you talk about drifting? Drifting is basically just acting without thinking. You're just kind of going through the motions. And the next thing you know, you're out in the periphery and you're wondering how you got there. So I think that's part of it too. I think Joe said something that I thought was significant, which is talk about knowledge that is beneficial to you. I think of it as watching your thoughts and watching what you're taking in terms of thought. We talked about this before. You know, like TV is very passive, and you know, you're just sitting there and you're watching it, and you know, being careful of the knowledge that you're bringing in. Is it useful? Is it going to help bring you towards the center, or is it pulling you from the periphery? Is it pulling you into the periphery? And so I think all this chapter to me is about being present and thinking about the actions that you're taking, and also thinking about the knowledge that you're taking in. And is it a knowledge that's going to be beneficial to you and bringing you towards the core?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Allison.
Yeah, I'm finding that as I read this, I see it in everything. I see it in how individuals treat other individuals, and then I see it in how governments treat other governments. You see it in war, because when people aren't seeing the God in someone else, their life, the other person's life isn't considered as valuable. And then I see it also in the way people treat themselves. So I feel like it's just such a profound thing that I feel like everything I look at, I'm like, oh, that's what that is. Oh, that's what that one. You know, when you see these real world examples of things, and it's so amazing that this was written so many years ago, but yet I see these lessons still being carried out in, you know, modern day world. So it's just a really beautiful thing to read, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Now, I really like the verses from 33 to 42. So I'm going to read those verses from the Sri Aurobindo translation, and I'm going to read Aurobindo's commentary on it, commentary on some of the words there, and it's quite profound. So I'm going to start with number 33. This is chapter 4. The sacrifice of knowledge, O Parantapa, is greater than any material sacrifice. Knowledge is that in which all this action culminates. not any lower knowledge, but the highest self-knowledge and God knowledge. Learn that by worshiping the feet of the teacher, by questioning and by service, the men of knowledge who have seen, not those who know merely by intellect, the true principles of things, will instruct you in knowledge. Possessing that knowledge, you will not fall again into mind's ignorance, O Arjun, for by this thou shalt see all existences without exception in the self, then in me. Now, this is his commentary on the self. What is meant by self here? This is Aurobindo's commentary. For the self is that one immutable, all-pervading, all-containing, self-existent reality, or Brahman, hidden behind our mental being, into which our consciousness widens out when it is liberated from the ego. We come to see all beings as becomings, bhutani, within the one self-existence. But this self, or immutable Brahman, we see too to be self-presentation to our essential psychological consciousness of a supreme being who is the source of our existence and of whom all that is mutable or immutable is the manifestation. He is God, the divine, the Purushottam. To him, we offer everything as a sacrifice. Into his hands, we give up our actions. In his existence, we live and move, unified with him in our nature and with all existences in him. We become one soul and one power of being with him and with all beings. With his supreme reality, we identify and unite our self-being. By works done for sacrifice, eliminating desire, we arrive at knowledge and at the soul's possession of itself. By works done in self-knowledge and God knowledge, we are liberated into the unity, peace, and joy of divine existence. Number 36. Even if you are the greatest doer of sin beyond all sinners, you will cross over all the crookedness of evil in the ship of this knowledge. As a fire kindled turns to ashes its fuel, O Arjun, so the fire of knowledge turns all work into ashes. There is nothing in the world equal in purity to knowledge. The man who is perfected by yoga finds it of himself in the self by the course of time. Now, this is his commentary of knowledge. It says, there is nothing in the world equal in purity to knowledge. This is his commentary on knowledge. Yoga and knowledge are, in this early part of Gita's teaching, the two wings of the soul's ascent. By yoga is meant union through divine works done without desire, with equality of soul to all things and all men as a sacrifice to the Supreme, while knowledge is that on which this desirelessness, this equality, this power of sacrifice is founded. This is so beautiful. The two wings indeed assist each other's flight, acting together, yet with a subtle alternation of mutual aid, like the two eyes in a man, which see together because they see alternately. They increase one another mutually by interchange of substance. As the works grow more and more desireless, equal-minded, sacrificial in spirit, the knowledge increases. With the increase of knowledge, the soul becomes firmer in the desireless, sacrificial equality of its works. So again, the number 38 is, there is nothing in the world equal in purity to knowledge. So we have discussed knowledge. The man who is perfected by yoga finds it of himself in the self by the course of time. Now he's commenting on the term himself. The knowledge grows within him and he grows into it as he goes on increasing in desirelessness, in equality, in devotion to the divine. It is only of the supreme knowledge that this can altogether be said. The knowledge which the intellect of man amasses is gathered laboriously by the senses and the reason from outside. To get this other knowledge, self-existent, intuitive, self-experiencing, self-revealing, we must have self-control and faith. 39. Who has faith, who has conquered and controlled the mind and senses, who has fixed his whole conscious being on the supreme reality, he attains knowledge. And having attained knowledge, he goes swiftly to the supreme peace. The ignorant who has not faith, the soul of doubt, goes to perdition. Neither his world, nor the supreme world, nor any happiness is for the soul full of doubt. So on the term, the ignorant who has not faith, now he's commenting on the term faith. We must have a faith which no intellectual doubt can be allowed to disturb. In fact, it is true that without faith, nothing decisive can be achieved, either in this world or for possession of the world above. And that it is only by laying hold of some sure basis and positive support that man can attain any measure of terrestrial or celestial success and satisfaction and happiness. The merely skeptical mind loses itself in the void. 41. He who has destroyed all doubt by knowledge and has by yoga given up all his works, given up all works, and is in possession of the self, is not bound by his works. Now he's commenting on the term works. When Gita says that all the totality of work finds its completion in knowledge, or that the fire of knowledge turns all works to ashes, it is not at all meant that there is cessation from works. What is meant by Gita is made clear in this shloka. The man of yoga and knowledge is not bound by his works. 42. Therefore, having cut asunder with the sword of knowledge this doubt that has arisen out of ignorance and abides in the heart, resort to yoga. Do thou stand up, O Bharata. Now he's commenting on the term doubt. Therefore, having cut asunder with the sword of knowledge this doubt. Now he's talking about doubt. In the lower knowledge, doubt and skepticism have their temporary use. In the higher, they are stumbling blocks. For there, the whole secret is not the balancing of truth and error, but of constantly progressing realization of revealed truth. It is not a truth which has to be proved, but a truth which has to be lived inwardly, a greater reality into which we have to grow. Finally, it is in itself a self-existent truth and would be self-evident if it were not for the sorceries of ignorance in which we live, the doubts, the perplexities which prevent us from accepting and following it, arise from that ignorance, from the sense-bewildered, opinion-perplexed heart and mind, living as they do in a lower and phenomenal truth, therefore questioning the higher realities. They have to be cut away with the sword of knowledge, says the Gita, by the knowledge that realizes, by resorting constantly to yoga, that is, by living out the union with the Supreme, whose truth, being known, all is known. So that is Sri Aurobindo's commentary on this beginning of description of Jnana. What does Jnana mean? What does knowledge of self mean? If anybody has any comments on this, go ahead and type exclamation mark. I personally find Aurobindo's commentary to be just amazing. The depth of his observations, it's just incredible. Joe.
Yeah, I'm not comparing, but in a way, I find this to be going back over it more clear as to understanding the spirit than Aquinas.
Mm-hmm.
These two particular passages. But this explains it, is that the idea of what it really truly means to be desireless in our devotion. But the thing that I think is most powerful is, I found that 38 and 39 were the most beautiful, but the most powerful was the specifically the idea of skepticism and its role within the lower and within the higher, where it can become debilitating at a certain point. It has its use when you are it has its use in to a certain degree with but taken to the extreme, it can actually be something that's paralyzing, and something that is also where the whole thing reminded me of having one foot in order in chaos. That really is being able to, okay, you're skeptical, you're still questioning things, but you're still understanding there is an order to the world, and you're still kind of getting outside of what you truly, what you believe to be true. But there's this, when skepticism is kind of carried to the extreme, it really can be something that is destructive, not constructive any longer. And when you're questioning things like that are kind of universal truths, then it becomes something where you're just I feel like your aim is not necessarily right. That's just some words that are just coming out what was said. Maybe I can come back and be a little bit more articulate.
Thank you. My understanding of this is what he's saying is that the self, the core of your being, has to be experienced. It is not about, like when you're taking data and trying to compare, that's a different process than kind of experiencing the core of your being. And when you're trying to doubt your own experience, you're kind of undercutting yourself right there. Whereas when the skepticism, about things outside, when you're trying to compare and contrast and trying to form concepts, is saying that is something that is valid. But this is Aurobindo's commentary. But when you're saying experience of yourself, if you doubt that, then you have nothing, because experience it has to be experienced. So I think that's what he's saying. Next up is going to be Elena.
Okay. Just covering the knowledge part of it. How do we distinguish between what we call the uncles, the family, right? Like we're fighting the family, all the uncles, the grandfather who loves us, and the whatever else, they all love us, they're comfortable, they're familiar. And the true knowledge. The true knowledge could be also, it could be easy and pleasant, or it could be, okay, go fight it, it's unpleasant, unfamiliar, just jump, do it. You are scared, go ahead, do it. So how do we distinguish what could be given by intuition and the true knowledge, and what could be presented by the uncles, by the whatever, the family who wants you to be, go back to the old ways? How do we maintain this balance? What's really true comes from the true knowledge or comes from the old ways? That's my question.
I don't know if I have any answer to that. What this part of Gita is saying is the kind of knowledge that they're talking about is a different kind of knowledge. This is knowledge of your own being. It is knowledge of your Atma. It is knowledge of Brahma. It is knowledge of the universal principles. So it's a different kind of knowledge. I think the knowledge that you're talking about is what Gita would call knowledge of things in the periphery. And how do you evaluate that? This concept of knowledge of Jnana Yoga is about self-knowledge, the nature of your own core, nature of your own center, what that is. That's what it is. So the subject is different. That's what I would say. Joe.
Just one line in here that actually reminds me a lot of, there's a relationship between that and Stoicism, is that the increase of knowledge of the soul becomes firmer in the desireless, sacrificial quality of its works. So that essentially when we talk about the discipline of desire in Stoicism, it's about this idea that you're knowing yourself, so you're able to control your desires. So there's an understanding of oneself with that. And then therefore you're able to essentially see what is objectively true and what is something that makes you truly will lead to happiness. And you no longer recognize that it's what you desire, it's what is real. And so that's kind of, it comes back to and it relates back to the idea of your experience as well. When you're in Stoicism, this is one of the reasons why they practice every night a daily review, is to see exactly what they desired and didn't desire, where that their desires dictated their actions, so that they know that there's this liberation from being desireless and learning how to manage that process. And that's knowledge. That's self-knowledge that you're gaining every single night. So, and that is more of an objective view of your experience. Sometimes we tell ourselves a story that isn't true if we don't write it down. We look back, we idealize things, and then that leads to a certain level of ignorance. So that kind of gets to the whole idea of understanding our experience in more objective terms. And once we do that, we actually can limit our desires within that process. So anyway.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. I really like the analogy, the metaphor he uses of the two wings, the knowledge and work, and how they work together like two eyes. You know, there are slightly different perspectives. What knowledge is the knowledge of the self. So it is always about self-knowledge whenever Gita talks about knowledge. And self-knowledge, self is Brahma, so it is the knowledge of universal principles. So what it is saying is that more you know, more you have self-knowledge, the better your work is going to be. The work is going to be less attached to things because you're going to be focused on the core of your being. You're going to be less attached to peripheral things while you're doing things. And the more you are practiced in working without getting attached to things, the more your knowledge will grow, more your self-knowledge will grow. So there is this virtuous loop between karma yoga and jnana yoga. That's what, you know, I think looking at it as two wings, I think is very, very beautiful. Next up is going to be Evanik. Before Jyoti goes, Jyoti, I just want to get your feedback because this is the next question I'm going to ask everybody. But before you go, if you could tell us what was it like doing this review? Because I want to continue doing the review in parallel. Go ahead, Jyoti.
This is wonderful. I think it's a good idea to stop in between and go back and refresh your knowledge and then make better connections. Because one after the one, you are reading all these chapters and they're actually all interrelated. And then you pull out the information from all the chapters and make connections. And that lead to the core, that lead to your center, that explains better. So I think this was a wonderful project.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. And folks, I recommend this very highly. My way of doing that is there is a YouTube video of this Eknath's, the translation that David was reading of Eknath. There's a beautifully read video. It's only about 2 hours, 15 minutes or so. So you can listen to the entire Gita in 2 hours, 15 minutes. And I often do that. So you just listen to the whole thing. And it's because this is so deep that you really have to let it kind of flow over you many, 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 many times. And this is an added bonus of having other people talk about it while we're doing that. Thank you.
Jyoti, where can we find the link for Eknath?
Let me see if I can find it. It's a particular one. But Evanik, if you could, I'm looking for the link. While Evanik, if you could go next.
Sure. So I just wanted to say, Shrikant, something you said about the experience and skepticism, because I was a little doubtful when I heard David read it. And I'm like, well, you know, of course we're going to have doubts, right? Like that just sounded to me like institutional religion. That's what it felt like when they tell you, you know, you don't doubt, just believe. But I think the way you expressed it is that you have to experience it. I think that's what makes it more personal. And I think that really had me think about it, because if you're doubting your experience, then you're doubting who you are at the core. And your experience is always going to be different than somebody else's experience. So just wanted to say thank you for that. That really tied that together for me. So thanks. Shrikant, you're muted.
Yes, I was trying to find the video, so I wanted to make sure that it didn't cause too much sound. This is the video that I recommend. This is the Eknath translation. No, not translation, but it is the reading of that translation. Next up is Connie. Connie, go ahead.
Yes, just in response to how effective this is. I came into the class in the middle, so I think maybe on chapter 8 or something. So I've been really piecing it together. And this has been incredible, life-changing to me, as I've mentioned before. And anytime I see you leading a class, I want to be in it. So I'm going to tomorrow. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I know you mentioned it before about going and listening to it, because I'm almost, even like speaking right now, I've been speechless as David's been reading these, in just saturating myself in the beauty. And your other class, I just want to kind of say, I've gone back to your 2020 Jung, that there were 9 sessions because of another class you're giving. So I'm doing that. So just thank you. And I definitely am glad you just posted that, because that will be my project in the morning to listen to this. He's reviewing these chapters has just been incredible tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. I mean, this is such an incredible work, and it is so life-giving, and at so many deep, so deep a level, that it is just, I think it is transforming, and it's really good. It's really great to see how effective it has been. For those who have been here right from the beginning, you know how concerned I was that, okay, how am I going to communicate this? Because it is so difficult. It is so different from the Western mind. But I think we have done a good job. A lot of the credit goes to Yogeshwar, because he has raised it to a completely new level. A lot of the credit goes to everybody who is here, because what happens is that, as Naneshwar says in his commentary, you see, you have this self within you. Each of us does. And if you engage it authentically, you have a lot to offer, not only yourself, but others. And that's so many of you are doing that, which is making this amazing. So thank you. Next up is going to be Joe.
Are we still going over what our takeaways are?
Yes. No. Now we're talking about how was this like? Let's do that. To wrap up.
Yeah, no.
What was it like going over these chapters?
I mean, I really enjoyed this a great deal, for a number of levels, because there's a number of core concepts that we've been taking. The 4 yogs, the center, the periphery. That we're constantly coming back to, and we can speak to, and they've moved us. The God in me recognizes the God in you. Those are things that are almost principles that we are actually that are guiding us there in a way. Maybe it's wrong to call them principles, but those are some of the bigger themes. This really helps us come back to recognize some of the very important concepts that we need to think about when we're covering the rest of the Gita. And I really enjoy this, because it really you realize how much you're getting out of it when you're going back through it. It's really remarkable. And I mean, and sometimes even at going through this at a meta level, it's very helpful to do, because sometimes when we're getting very detailed philosophy. You know, we're really getting into what it means. We're going very, very deep. But then we bring this up and we're going chapter by chapter. We're taking the concepts that have spoken to us most, and we're seeing how it integrates into our daily life. And I think that this, and it allows us sometimes to see, it brought to me attention to how important your diagrams are, or, you know, repeatedly, how they've actually taught us in so many different ways. And I'm just thinking about the times that we looked at the Gita and how we used it in our Ayn Rand meetups. I mean, and that's what was coming up for me when we were reading some of these, and that how that philosophy how these two philosophies went together, and how, you know, how Rourke fit into this but those images, I mean, this is the depth of which we're able to apply it to everyday life. And then these are very, very deep concepts that are coming to from another culture, as you mentioned, that are speaking to us very deeply. And that's that's an incredible thing to be able to accomplish, both for 52 living ideas. And so going through this at a meta level, I think, is very, very, very helpful. But again, I think we do need to go deep each time too. I mean, by reviewing each passage and looking at the metaphors specifically, I think that those are very, very important as well. So anyway.
Thank you. Joe, I have an exactly opposite reaction whenever I go back and review things. It's like, whenever I'm looking at this, I'm saying how little I understand.
All right. Well,
again, that's what is happening to me. It's like, and this is the same, and this is the process. I think that for me, this is the process of learning. Like I was looking at Aurobindo's commentary on the Self, and I'm saying, wow, how deeply he gets it. I did not get this part, you know, I did not get this part. I did not quite get the, you know, the depth of this. And that happens again and again in all, like for example, I'm trying to integrate things into my diagram. I tried to do that with Jung, and Jung completely blew me away. He's saying, wait a minute, you can do this with the diagram. Of course, he's not here to say it, but his words, you know, when you actually engage with it, it is telling you something. And this weekend, this Sunday, I'm going to do Louis Sullivan in my diagram, which is going to be the hardest thing I've done. And I'm expecting that the same thing is going to happen. It's like everything that we're studying is a lot deeper than what I can handle. Okay, I cannot really grasp these things. Okay, I'm not really good at this. I'm just barely, I always have a feeling that I'm just doing the surface here, and there is just so much more. And every time you go through it, it's like, and that's a natural process, because it is so deep that you have to kind of understand the surface first. And once you understand the surface, you see something deeper than that. And then you think, oh, that was the deep thing, I now have it. Then you understand something deeper than that. So that's the great thing about these works. And this is true of the Gospel of John. It is true of Tao Te Ching. It is true of Bhagavad Gita. And I'm really grateful to have all of you folks here to be able to do that, because I am learning much, much faster than I could possibly do by myself. So thank you. Go ahead, Joe.
There is one thing I was thinking, is that you could go over this multiple times, like almost once a year, like kind of keep going over it. Like,
no, that's not it, Joe. Like, for example, somebody like Yogeshwar does it like once an hour.
Well,
course, you know, that's
I'm not Yogeshwar. I can't do that. Right. So I need a break.
That's what people do. That's what people have done through the ages, you know. This is true with the Tao. This is true with the Bible. If you look at Aquinas, I'm sure he did something similar. This is not just the philosophers, like an Indian classical musician. He does that. He's trying to kind of get to the self while singing like 18 hours a day. That's what he does, 18 hours a day. So that's what we
Wow.
can do. So what we are doing is relatively easy work, you know. So and the, you know, and they get a lot further than what we have. So this is a lot more. All right, folks, thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye,
Shrikant.
everybody.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Are we doing this tomorrow night?
Tomorrow night, Yogeshwar is going to be back, and Yogeshwar is so good that I don't want to interrupt anything that Yogeshwar is doing. So we will do, you know, whenever Yogeshwar is here, we'll do that. If he has to take time off, we will do the review.
Okay.
Okay, we have gone up to chapter 4. So next one will, whenever we do the review, we'll start with chapter 5. All right, thanks, folks.
Yep.
Good night.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Good night.
Good
Bye.
night.